What is up, guys? It has been a minute. Now, before we get into the muscle gain Q&A, quick little life update. So it is 3 weeks since my most recent and third surgery that I've had in Bali. Basically, I got a small cut up in my groin. Didn't look after it, and Bali water here and the bacteria levels will fuck you pretty hard if you don't take care of it. I didn't take care of it and I paid the price. It got really badly infected. Had to go to the hospital under general anesthetic to have a surgery for them to cut and remove the infection, sew me back up, and now I'm basically in the healing process once again. Now, as you can imagine, with the position that the surgery has taken place and where it was infected, not only does it mean no bedroom action, it means that heavy lifting is basically off the cards for a fair bit of time. So just trying to keep myself busy at the moment with client work and seeing a little bit more of Bali and going out for meals and things, basically just to take my mind off competing and bodybuilding, because when I am at home spending a hell of a lot of time doing not much, the mind can run wild and stress me out a fair bit. But it is what it is, and being a little crybaby is not going to improve the situation whatsoever. So just doing my best to accept it and be patient and wait for the body to adjust. With my other injuries, I will admit I got back in the gym too quick. Thought I could do some Superman shit and just don't really need to listen to what the doctors say. When I feel good, I'll just go back, and I think that has probably contributed to me having follow-up problems. So learning my lesson now and just listening to the doctor, being patient and waiting exactly until they say I'm good to go before I give it another crack. So I'm not really sure what that means for my contest plans. Obviously, I really want to compete at the end of the year, but with the regression that has taken place with the third surgery, I'm a long way off what I would need to be competitive at the level that I want to be. So obviously I'll get back to it as soon as I can with everything I've got, but it's going to depend on how I respond. And it might take me a long time to get back, it might be quick, I'm not sure, but it's all going to depend on that. So I think that is enough of my whinging for one video. Let's get into the muscle gain questions. Do you prefer to increase calories slowly or aggressively during a bulk? It's going to depend a little bit, but there's downsides to going too fast and there's downsides to going too slow. If you go too fast with your calorie increases, you're not going to allow metabolic adjustment to take place, and you're just going to store a whole lot of body fat really quickly. On the flip side, if you increase calories too slowly, there's a big likelihood that you're not going to provide a novel calorie surplus to facilitate future muscle gain. So generally I like to increase calories during a bulk around 5 to 10% at each checkpoint that you plateau. Now, I would increase smaller, like closer to the 5% mark, if I was a little bit fatter and deeper into my muscle gain phase. But I'd be a little bit more aggressive, closer to the 10% mark, if I was still quite lean and early on in my bulk. Okay, next one. I've ended my cut. Should I go straight to maintenance or reverse up slowly? Again, depends a little bit on your situation. If your intention is to remain lean and just rock the abs and the beach body look, and that's when I'd go with a reverse diet. So just increasing calories very, very slowly, only increasing them once weight has stabilized or plateaued. However, if your intention is to gain muscle or go into an off season, then don't fuck around and waste time reducing the size of the deficit or being in a tiny, tiny little surplus. Because number one, it's just gonna extend the time that you feel shitty post-diet. And number two, it's not conducive to muscle gain. If you do wanna grow muscle, take your calories straight to maintenance right away. Wait for body weight to adjust, for glycogen levels and body water to stabilize, and then get right into your lean gain phase of that. When should we expect your muscle gain book? So for those who don't know, I have been writing a muscle gain ebook for the last sort of 6 months, trying to cover basically everything that I think you need to know to construct a muscle gain program for yourself. I think it's really, really good. Obviously I'm biased as hell, but I do think you guys are gonna like it. And it is just about finished. I'm going through the final stages of editing, and I think it should be good in the next few weeks. So keep an eye out for that. What are your thoughts on L-carnitine for increasing free fatty acid oxidation? So intramuscular carnitine is basically a fat mobilizer. So it moves fatty acids to the bloodstream where they can be oxidized for energy. People then assumed that if we supplement with carnitine, we can increase our carnitine levels and have a greater propensity for fatty acid oxidation or fat burn. But there is a problem. When we supplement with at least oral carnitine, it doesn't seem to increase intracellular carnitine levels any further. They seem to just be stabilized. So basically what it tells us is we're just pissing out some dollars when we supplement with carnitine. Now, people have claimed that injectable carnitine can somewhat bypass this problem of oral carnitine. The research is sketchy as hell, and I haven't found anything that convincingly says injectable carnitine is super effective. But during my last prep under guidance from John Meadows, I did try it under his guidance for 10 weeks. Leading into my prep. Honestly, I didn't notice anything. I didn't find that I was able to consume any more calories, or the fat loss all of a sudden started picking right up. So I am very, very skeptical that it helps in a practically noticeable way. So that's my current thoughts on it. How long into a bulk till I make calorie adjustments either up or down? It's gonna depend on your situation. I sound like I'm fucking saying it depends every time, but it does. Like, I've had clients and myself personally go long stretches in an off season without needing any calorie increases whatsoever. If you are achieving your targeted weekly body weight gains consecutively week to week, there is no need to adjust your calories any further. The saying, like, if it's not broke, don't try to fix it, applies very strongly here. Now, my recommendation is wait until you have missed your targeted weekly weight gain range for 2 weeks in a row. If let's say you're planning to gain 100 to 400 grams per week during your bulk. If you are outside of that range, so let's say you've gained much faster than that for 2 weeks in a row, then I'd bring calories down. If you haven't reached the 100 gram gain threshold for 2 weeks in a row, then I'd increase calories. So when you increase and decrease calories, it shouldn't be predicated on a time limit, it should be predicated on your body weight changes. Okay, how much does alcohol impede muscle gain? This is a fucking hard question to answer, because what do you want? Like, alcohol is going to reduce muscle gain 20% for everybody? Like, it's so variable. How many times are you drinking? How often? How many drinks are you having? It's going to completely fucking depend on that. But it's definitely detrimental to muscle gain, to the point that I've just decided that I'm not going to drink alcohol. So I think the last drink that I had was over a year ago, because the amount of effort and resources that I put into developing my physique, why the fuck would I want to take something that has the strong potential to impair my physique and send it backwards? It just doesn't make any sense in my mind. Now, the research is very clear that the more you drink, obviously the more negative the effects are. It reduces protein synthesis, it reduces testosterone levels, it reduces your recovery capacity. So if you are drinking like any more than sort of a couple of times a week, and you're having more than 2 drinks on occasion, it's gonna noticeably impair your result, I think. And just noticing from working with a lot of clients, because I do work with some Gen Pop clients, and telling them to not drink at all is just not realistic. They're gonna wanna go have their sort of Saturday night with their boys and whatnot. But I have noticed that when working with guys like that, if they're having any more than sort of 3 alcoholic beverages a week, I just find it super fucking hard to make good progress with them, whether that's fat loss or muscle gain. It seems to be on both sides. So I would just keep that in mind. If you are really, really serious about optimizing your physique and getting the best out of yourself, I would recommend abstaining. And if abstaining is not an option, then just picking a handful of times throughout the year, like special events like a New Year's Eve or something like that, where you will have a few drinks, and just leaving it for the rest of the time. What are the most effective set and rep ranges for muscle growth? Tough question. You guys like the broad ones. For how many sets you should do to optimize muscle gain is going to depend on your training style. So for example, if you train like Dorian Yates, balls to the wall, like surpassing your limits failure type sets, then you're not going to need a whole lot of working sets each week to grow. If you train like a pussy, then you're gonna have to do high volume and you're gonna have to do a lot of sets to create an anabolic stimulus. Generally speaking, if you guys want numbers, around 10 to 20 sets per week, per muscle group, is going to be needed to get close to optimizing muscle gain. But again, like 10 to 20 is a huge fucking range, and it's going to depend on how you're training and what your individual recovery capacities are. Generally, I would recommend if you do, let's say, 13 working sets per muscle group and you're recovering just fine, push a little bit higher and keep pushing it higher until you find that your recovery capacity is compromised. And that probably means that you're close to your maximum recoverable capacity, where any sets sort of beyond that are probably not going to contribute to muscle growth any further. So the most working sets that you can do each week and recover from optimally, that's going to be your ideal set number for muscle growth. Now, rep ranges. The research is very clear that if you're getting stronger, anywhere from the 6 to 30 rep range, you're going to be building muscle. Does that mean getting strong in the 30 rep range is optimal? Probably not, but you're still going to grow muscle there. I think if we want to sort of narrow that range and speak more optimally, I think if you're doing the predominance of your work in the 8 to 15 rep range and getting stronger there, that's going to give you your best shot of building the most muscle possible. Do you recommend test boosters for muscle growth? No, I don't. There really hasn't been any convincing research whatsoever that any over-the-counter or natural testosterone booster has any beneficial effects on muscle growth. Now, I think a lot of the confusion comes from interpreting the research studies on these things. People see these research studies and they think it's really, really convincing, but just because you see a statistical significant increase in testosterone levels from baseline does not mean that that's therefore going to have a positive anabolic effect. And there's actually been some follow-up studies on some testosterone boosters that have actually shown them to have a negative anabolic effect. Really, if you are in the natty category, it's not something that I'd play with. I just really wouldn't worry about it. If I have a higher body fat percentage, like 30% for a male, should I cut first or should I bulk? If you're 30% BF as a male, I really don't think you have any business getting fatter. Like 30% is pretty freaking fat in terms of health considerations. Absolutely, I would consider cutting first, because bulking beyond 30% body fat, number one, I think your nutrient partitioning is going to be compromised. So you're gonna have a greater propensity to store body fat versus gain muscle from your calorie surplus. Your insulin sensitivity is going to be pretty bad, and your health markers are going to be pretty bad as well. So getting fatter beyond that is only going to exacerbate those problems. And let's say you end up at 35% body fat at the end of your bulk. Man, you got a lot of work to do in your next cut before you're going to look anything somewhat respectable. So if you're at 30% BF, cut down to at least sort of the 15 to 20% mark, and then you can consider muscle gaining. How important is gut health for muscle gain? This is an interesting one, because the last few years gut health has been like this super exciting thing, and it sort of came on the scene and everyone's been like gut health, gut health, gut health. I really don't think it is as important as most people claim. If we just go from anecdote, we look back at like the bodybuilders, like the Ronnie Colemans and such, they didn't even know what gut health was. Ronnie didn't have any vegetables, and these are the biggest guys in the world. Now, obviously the whole anabolic steroids thing is a caveat that needs to be considered, but I just don't see, even in the natural scene, since everyone started sort of taking kimchi and prebiotics and kombucha, that the physiques have improved that much. Now, I think there are notable health advantages to at least trying to optimize your gut health in the form of having sort of variation in your diet, but I don't think it's a massive player in the muscle process. Are there any reasons for incorporating pauses or slowing down your reps? Absolutely. So if you watch how I train, It's quite slow. Maybe it might not even look like I'm working that hard, but the benefits of training slow, for one, is that your rep execution remains very consistent. Now, if you are tracking your performance like I do in a journal, and one week you do 10 reps of 100 kilos nice low, it's very easy to beat that performance the next week by just going a little bit faster and getting a few extra reps. But have you got stronger? No, you've just speeded up the rep tempo. So by keeping the rep tempo consistent and keeping it controlled, it just is an accountability tool to stop you basically cheating your performance to beat the logbook. Now, the same sort of thing goes for pauses. For example, if I did 6 reps nice and steady on incline press, and then the next week, and let's say that was my max, 6 was like my RIL 0. Then I come back the next week, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna fucking get 7. And then I just bounced the last couple of reps using sort of elastic energy to get the last rep up. Have I got stronger? Fuck no. I've just cheated the logbook again. So by holding the pause is again accountability tool to stop you using little tricks to beat the logbook, because the purpose isn't to just beat the numbers in the book, it's to actually get stronger. And the only way to accurately measure your strength progression is if your rep execution and performance stays consistent throughout the training. Do I take creatine on off days? Yep, you should. Just take it year round. There's no reason to take breaks. How long do you typically like to do your bulking and cutting phases? I hate saying it depends. Generally speaking, I like to bulk for 4 times as long as I cut. Now, why is that? It's because building muscle takes a hell of a lot longer time than shredding fat. For example, a very realistic, conservative calorie deficit could yield 500 grams of true fat loss in just a week. Now, to build 500 grams of actual muscle tissue, probably gonna take you a month, sometimes even longer. So because of that difference time generate the tissue change, your time spent in each phase therefore needs to be accounted for. Let's say you've done a 2-month cut and you got into some pretty good condition. I would then like to follow up my next gaining phase for around about 8 months. The benefits of having sort of these longer bulking phases allows you to establish momentum. Momentum is a very real thing in bodybuilding or muscle growth. And you might notice that it's not until sort of the 3-4 month mark of your calorie surplus, that's the point where you've sort of removed all of the diet fatigue, and that's when you start having your most productive training and most productive muscle growth. Now, there's a really common problem in the fitness industry of people doing these short bulks for like a couple of months, and then they see their abs fade a little bit, and then they jump into a cut again. It's a bad move, and more often than not, what you see is you cut back down, it's like, oh fuck, I didn't actually build any muscle during that bulk. So that's just because building muscle takes a fuckload of time. You are gonna need to be a moderate calorie surplus chronically every day for an extended period of time if you have any hopes of yielding some new muscle tissue during your next cut. So generally I wouldn't bulk any less 4 months at a time. If you bulk for less than 4 months, you're just not going to build that much muscle. Generally 4 times the length of your last cut. Can cardio inhibit the ability to gain muscle during a bulk? Sure it can if you do enough of it and if it's at a higher intensity. My general rule is that your cardio is impeding your ability to 1, perform in the gym, or 2, recover from your weight training work. It's probably going to be limiting your muscle growth somewhat. We have a lot of research that shows when you do concurrent strength training in combination with higher volume endurance training that you tend to make less strength gains and your endurance gains seem to be reduced as well. So it definitely needs to be a heavy bias towards your strength training or your hypertrophy work versus your cardio work if your priority here is to actually build muscle. Now, when you are trying to build muscle in a bulk, I generally recommend cardio on your off days. That's about it. There is research to show that the cardio isn't done on your weightlifting days. The negatives seem to be reduced a hell of a lot. I like a little bit of cardio in the off season on my rest days where it's not going to interfere with my training, just for the cardiovascular health benefit, for the appetite regulation benefits as well. Do I think a full body workout 5 times a week can be efficient to build muscle? It will build muscle as long as you're progressing, but do I think it's optimal? No. Let's talk anecdote first. How many of the biggest physiques in the world are training full body? Now, scientifically speaking, the research tends to show that a training frequency any more than sort of 2 to 3 times per week of a single muscle doesn't seem to really enhance gains any further. So training a muscle 1 to 3 times per week, that's going to be the range you want to be in. And generally for full body workouts, that's the only time I'd recommend those is for someone who can only train like 2 or 3 times per week. If you can get in the gym 5 times per week, then I'd be running some sort of bro split or like a push-pull legs push-pull sort of setup. I'm trying to figure out my calories / macros for bulking. I know my protein. Generally, what do you put fats under? So he's saying what is like your threshold for dietary fat intake in the off season or when you're bulking. There's 2 ranges that I like to recommend. The first one, which is probably the easiest, is to have fats around 1 gram per kilo of your body weight. So for me, 100 kilos, used to be 115, that'd be like 100 grams of fat. That would sort of be like my upper limit. Having any more fats beyond that is really not gonna have any benefits, except fats are calorie dense, so it can be easier to get in calories, so helpful for someone that has a low appetite. And secondly, fats typically make meals taste better. So again, if someone's struggling to get in food in, by making the meals a little bit tasty, it makes it a little bit easier for them. Now, a second way you can do it is having your fat set around 20 to 25% of your daily calories. If you're within those ranges, that's sort of your like safe limit, recommended limit. You'll be getting more than enough of your essential free fatty acids, but it's not going to be so much that it could be potentially taking away from your carbohydrate intake, which we need to actually facilitate training and to create the anabolic stimulus from the training. Should you take creatine before or after the gym? It really doesn't matter. I know there's been a bunch of studies looking at the timing of creatine and things like that. Honestly, I think it's inconsequential. So just pick a time that suits you and just run with it. For me, I will have my creatine in my post-workout shake on my training days, and on my off days, I'll just have it with my last drink before bed. What's the ideal rate of weight gain for bulking? Generally, I recommend 0.2 to 0.5% body weight gains each week. That can be a pretty big difference. Generally, I'd target closer to the slower rate, so 0.2%, if you are quite advanced lifter or if you're a little bit higher body fat. Now, the reason for that is because number one, an advanced lifter has a reduced propensity for muscle gain. They've been doing it a whole lot of time. They're not going to be able to chuck on pounds and pounds of muscle in a training year. So it doesn't make sense to therefore pile in a bunch of calories because it's not going to help muscle gain much further. The other reason for if your body fat's a little bit higher, again, like we said, you don't need putting on a bunch of fat when you're already at a higher body fat to begin with. Additionally, your propensity for muscle gain tends to be diminished when you've been at a higher body fat or if you've been exposed to a calorie surplus for a long time. Now, I'd be a little bit more aggressive, like closer to the 0.5% per week, which for me would be like gaining 500 grams a week. If you are quite lean to begin with, like still got some abs and veins and things like that, because you have a high propensity for muscle gain at that point. And if you're sort of like a noob or you've just been training for a few years, because as we know, if you're in the first few years of training, you're able to grow muscle pretty fucking easily. So it makes sense to try to take advantage of that by growing a little bit faster. How do you know when you should stop and Minicut? Now, I'm a big believer that people overuse Minicuts way too much, and it detracts from the overall muscle gain. They end up looking the same fucking year after year. So if you haven't been in a bulk for at least 4 months, don't even fucking consider a Minicut. It's not time. But things to look out for. If your appetite has really diminished, that's a good sign that you've probably been exposed to the calorie surplus for long enough. And it can be beneficial to have some time on lower food, reset the hunger signals to facilitate your next push. Then additionally, I would look at physique cues. So if you've got no sort of midsection outlines, no abdominals to see at all, or if you've got like fat hang, like especially for guys, it tends to happen like the lower back area and things like that. If you've got visible hanging fat, that's a good sign that you've probably put on enough and it's time to clean up the body fat a little bit. For guys, I like to keep, like, vascularity is a genetic component to start with, but for most of my guys, I like to keep like a slight outline of like the bicep vein in place as well. Once that's faded completely, that's a good sign that usually body fat's creeping up into those higher ranges as well. Now, timeline speaking, so one thing I also look at is timelines. If you've been bulking for 12 months straight, I generally don't recommend bulking for much longer than that. Now, that's just because you can develop what's referred to as anabolic resistance, which is when you've been exposed to a calorie surplus for so long, you've been gaining muscle for so long, the body tends to put up mechanisms that can basically make muscle growth harder and harder. So the longer you've been bulking, the less efficient muscle growth becomes. So if you are at the year mark, taking a little break to just pull some body fat down, reduce food for a little bit, can be a nice way to just reset the system and resensitize your body, your muscles for the next phase of growth. So we've been going for a bit. We're gonna wrap that up right there. I'm sorry to the guys, I wasn't able to answer all of your questions, but I did my best. I don't want this to drag out and get too boring. But if this has been the sort of first style of like a targeted Q&A that I've done before, I'm not sure if it's gonna be good, I'm not sure if it's shit, but let me know what you think about it. Like if you'd like me to do like a fat loss specific Q&A or like a training specific Q&A, drop a comment down below and like I'm happy to do it to answer your questions and help where I can. Thank you guys if you have made it all the way along. If you haven't subscribed already, would really appreciate it if you could. Obviously, I am out of action for a little bit longer, but I can't wait to be back in the gym and getting some more training footage and getting back to the process of working towards the show. My motivation hasn't diminished at all, so I hope when I can get back into it, I can show you guys what can be possible with a hell of a lot of setbacks, but when you've just got that really, really strong hunger to push and put all of your effort into one goal. Thank you guys again. I'm done. We'll see you in the next one.